Welcome to the Along Podcast. I'm Sierra, a millennial.
And I'm Tracy, a baby boomer.
And on this show, we're not afraid to talk about age and how it changes things. Wellness, relationships, lifestyle, honestly, everything in life. So come along, because today we are asking the question, is Gen Z too deep in their feels? I don't know, Tracy. What do you think? And I think they're a pretty emotional bunch. I'm not going to lie.
Okay, but the first question is, what the hell is feels? I mean, I do kind of know, but I do want to. I want to understand this term.
Okay, so I think actually this is a millennial term in my feels, and I'm pretty sure it came from like a Drake song or something like that. But basically, it just means that you're feeling really emotional.
Okay.
But okay, so before we get really deep into that, I really want to sort of like set the tone and kind of understand where you came from in your feels, because I think a lot of this is something that we're kind of taught in life. So did you come from a we don't talk about that house, or like we don't air our dirty laundry type house?
Pretty much. We were not in our feels. I mean, we were in our feels, but my mom was always in her feels. Sorry, Mom, but a lot of emotions. My dad was polar opposite, but fighting and the usual family stuff, but the real stuff, you're talking about the real stuff, right?
Well, like, I mean, I guess anything, but yeah, sure.
Because but as far as talking about our feelings with my siblings and with my parents, not really.
Yeah. So I mean, when I was thinking about this, I feel really lucky that first of all, I've been in therapy since I was 5. And I think my mom, although she's not great about talking about her own feelings, she recognized that I would have feelings. And I think that came from my grandmother, who was not good about talking about her feelings.
Well, that makes sense.
So my mom sort of approached me a little bit differently. And so I'm really, really thankful for that. But I really do think that this honestly becomes a little bit of a generational question, because when I think about people who have that sort of, we don't air our dirty laundry, or like, you know, everything is behind closed doors, it's usually people that are of like the older generation. Mm-hmm. I think millennials were probably one of the first generations that maybe their parents were okay with therapy, and maybe their parents were a little bit more open to talking about things. Still, maybe It's behind closed doors. We don't air our dirty laundry, but at least maybe we talk about it in the house and it stays in the house, and that's it. But I do think so much of it is generational. Would you agree with that?
I do. And I'm just thinking of, I have many, many nieces and nephews. I'm thinking of my sister's kids. They are very much in their feels. And yes, I would say that the therapy thing was much more normalized.
And it's funny because now, okay, I would say I'm somebody that's pretty comfortable with my feelings, but I think I still have a little bit of like certain things that maybe at least I don't put on the internet. Gen Z is very seemingly okay with being messy. Part of me is like, is that your 20s? Because I feel like I was okay with being messy to my friends like in my 20s, but when it came to work and when it came to the internet and things that I would put on the internet, I was not messy. But Gen Z is posting a lot of stuff. Like, hey, have you heard this term crash out? It's a trend right now on TikTok.
Not really.
Okay, Greg, have you heard the term crash out?
I have not.
Okay. So crash out is a trend that's happening on TikTok right now. And what crash out means, well, what do you think it means?
I think it means burnt out, melting down like the Wicked Witch of the West.
Okay, that's very close to what it is. So crash out essentially means like, imagine if you just found out that your significant other is cheating on you, like the emotional level you would be in. It's crying, messy, probably going to do something you regret sort of level of emotion. And that's what crash out means. And a lot of people are filming themselves either faking being in a crash out mode or actually going through a crash out and like filming themselves crying. And it is a trend right now on TikTok.
You know, it's so funny because I have seen people doing that, and it is shocking to me. But part of me did wonder, okay, is this real? Are they faking this? Are they crying on purpose?
Yeah.
So it kind of just occurred. It wasn't even that their cry wasn't genuine. It was like there was something else going on. Like, you're really going to be really sobbing like this? Is that Is that what people really do? And they're going to tell the world about it?
And I have seen comments on some of those videos that have come up on social media where people are like, so you're so distraught that the first thing you do is pull out your phone and film yourself? It's like, yeah, that's a good point. But here's the thing. As somebody, I always like to be a little bit of an advocate for people, showing their true colors and wearing their emotions on their sleeve, because I think it's really hard for people to do these days. And this world is a lot, let's be honest. But I do, as refreshing as I find it, that they're so willing to sort of just show them true selves, I also, in my mind, kind of question, like, how much of it is actually rooted in like emotional intelligence and trying to have a conversation about something versus like reactivity, which, like, I think reactivity a lot of times are just sort of like it can be something that means well, that like I need to speak the truth, but it's not necessarily something that has like an introspective moment to it, not all the time. And so that's kind of like I look at this and I'm like, I think they're more just being really vocal about what's going on with them as opposed to true emotional intelligence. Like, when I think of emotional intelligence, I think of somebody that has a little bit more control over the situation as opposed to just screaming loud and for everybody to hear sort of thing. And particularly crash out, that would definitely be what I don't think that's necessarily emotional intelligence. I think that's more of a, being really loud and vocal about something.
I want to know how this crash out began. What do you think?
I don't know how it began, but like all things on the internet, it has taken over. And it is, I don't know. I mean, it's become part of just everyday conversation. Like, I see it on Instagram and people's like captions or whatever. They'll be like, 10 seconds later, I crashed out or something like that. Like, it's like a cool photo of them and they're like, right before my crash out.
It's so different now. I think, because if you did that in public, like at an awards ceremony, let's say, and the crying, I remember watching Academy Awards a while back, and people I was watching with, there was an acceptance speech. I won't say who it was. And they were just kind of horrified because it was too much emotion.
Too emotional?
Yeah. And I mean, that was kind of my experience growing up, that doing that, and especially putting it out in public, was like, you don't do that.
Yeah,
it's different.
It's the putting it out in public part. It's like, not that you can't do it. It's
right.
that you don't do it out in public. And Gen Z seems to be doing everything in public these days, right? Like, and part of that, I think, is because of when social media became part of their everyday thing. It is way more integrated into their life, and the front-facing camera of recording things in their life is so much more integrated than any previous generations. I actually did a little bit of looking into this, because we talked about how it seems like it's a generational thing, that Gen Z is talking more about themselves. And so I was curious, like, what the evolution of like therapy and just in general, like people being much more open with their emotional state was. And I looked it up. So the rise of therapy culture. So before the 1960s, this was like basically anything having to do with therapy essentially was only like if you were like in a mental institute. And so it was considered like a very taboo thing to talk about therapy at all. And then in the 1950s to 70s, that's when the psychiatric medications came out. So like the Prozac days, those medications really changed how people dealt with it. So there were fewer people were like being institutionalized for like basic depression, and were actually able to coexist in life. So the 50s and 70s, there was a big sort of medication boom, but talk therapy was still kind of a taboo thing. The 80s and 90s apparently is when talk therapy really blew up. And actually, if you think back to this makes a lot of sense, because this is when Frasier was on. This is when Good Will Hunting was a really like popular movie. The Sopranos, which the whole premise of The Sopranos is that Tony Soprano is a mob leader and he goes to therapy, which is really kind of funny. But on top of that, you also have on-air doctors. You have Dr. Phil, who had his show around that time, who he was launched through Oprah, who spent a lot of time dedicating conversations around mental health and feelings and all that sort of stuff. Self-improvement books were really normalized around this time. And this is like the era of, like, my mom was a 90s mom. So this was my childhood that I sort of grew up in, right? So this is like when millennials start to sort of see this language and start to see that, oh, it's okay to talk about these things. It's okay to like want to improve yourself. Therapy is like still, maybe a lot of people still think like you go to it if there's something wrong with you and have a little bit of a taboo around it, but it's starting to become a more normal thing. So then the 2010s and the 2020s sort of come in, and therapy becomes part of this sort of meme speak. You see a lot of people talking about like, their relationships, and you see a lot of people talking about like what type of attachment style they have. This is also the time at the tail end of this when COVID happens. And everybody is feeling all the feels, right? And that created a whole new shift in which therapy started to become more available to people with the rise of things like BetterHelp, with the rise of all of these platforms where therapists no longer, you had to go into an office. A lot of therapists were allowing you to do Zoom. And that's just created this insane boom where we have this thing called therapy speak that is permeating a lot of social media, Instagram, TikTok. It's where you see a lot of people, again, talking about attachment styles. They're talking about boundaries. They're very much, and probably not the best ways, sometimes throwing around terms like narcissist or trauma or gaslighting. And that becomes normal conversation and normal ways to address a situation or analyze a situation, which is very different than I would say probably you or I grew up,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I didn't do a lot of therapy. I don't know what to say. I'm kind of, I know my mom went through a lot of therapy.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the reason, just because it was a crazy, let's say, emotionally twists and turns, and it was a very bumpy road on that level for me. So, I've sort of mixed feelings about it, probably just because I grew up with that experience.
Yeah.
And I think it's great, though. I mean, I think it's great that people are doing the self-reflection. I think that's a good thing.
I think that's incredibly important. One of the things that I do like about the fact that therapy speak has sort of permeated social media and that Gen Z is so open to it is the idea that in a way they're making it more accessible. That is also something that kind of scares me, though, because, not that I don't want people to access therapy, anytime you it's kind of like, if you ever listen to like a health podcast and it's like some doctor or something, and they start out by saying, they give like the whole thing at the very beginning, like, I am a doctor, but I'm not your doctor. Please do not take this as medical advice.
Right.
And I haven't heard a lot of the disclaimers of that. And I really do. I don't know if therapists are doing the same thing, but it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
Like when you have a therapist that's making a video of 10 signs that your boyfriend is a narcissist, it's not advice specifically to you. It is general red flags that maybe then, if you're seeing this, you should go talk to a therapist and see if this is actually does apply to you. Because I think people also need to forget that we do have confirmation bias. So a lot of times, like, you can be seeing stuff, and especially the algorithm will take you down a certain like rabbit hole, and before you know it, you've almost like WebMD'd your psyche. And it's where you suddenly start to like think like, oh, that's what's happening. This is what's happening. And the more you get further into it, the more you convince yourself that it's something that's really, really big.
Yeah. You know the old adage. I just read something about this the other day. Somebody pointing this out.
Yeah.
That if somebody gives you the suggestion, don't think of a purple elephant. And then what will they do?
You'll think of a purple elephant.
Or it's that kind of thing. Or talking about a type of car, and then all of a sudden you see the car everywhere.
Yep.
So I know that is a slippery slope.
It is
and the
a slippery
narcissist thing specifically.
Yeah.
I think because, are you looking for that trait? What comes first? Is it real, or is it something that you're kind of projecting onto the person, or I don't know?
Well, I think I've been in therapy since I was 5. I don't go like every single day, and I go through periods of my life where I back off from it for a little bit and then I go back on. But the whole point to me of being comfortable with therapy is that when I do have something going on in my life, I know quickly how to find someone to talk to about it. And I like that I have that tool in my back pocket. Therapy has helped me tremendously through a lot of really difficult times in my life. It's literally saved my life when I had an eating disorder. But I don't think everybody needs therapy. I think everybody needs the ability to be able to talk to someone and have someone know their truth. And also the willingness to want to improve themselves. And you can do that without therapy. I do believe in that. So as much as I love therapy, I love even more seeing that people are even interested in these ideas. But I do think it's a little bit dangerous, because what happens when you have situations where people are making very generic therapy content on some of these things. And it's generic because you're not in a doctor's office talking specifically about your situation. They're just making a generic statement, and then people are trying to apply it to themselves. What happens is that people then start to go try and diagnose other people. And they try and use that on like, oh, you know what your problem is? Your attachment style is this and this. And like, you're not that person's therapist. You're not a licensed person who should be able to like make that, inclination towards that person. And then they make decisions based off of those things, which can be a little bit of a slippery slope and a little dangerous, I think. But I still like the idea that Gen Z has created this world that it's okay to have that out there.
That's definitely a good thing.
Yeah.
I just want to know, I just would like to know how they are navigating life. I mean, everybody's different, so you can't say the whole generation. Mm-hmm. But with this new way of being in the world and this access to all the online therapy, I think that you made that a great point about that. It's so pervasive now. And and I think the pandemic really played a part in this.
100%.
But, and then, okay, so then you have that. And now you have this crash out stuff.
Yeah.
So are those connected?
So I looked into this, and first of all, therapy has been, I haven't found, the closest stat that I could find was back in like 2021 of like the uptick of therapy, which there was a big spike between 2019 and 2021. It was like something like like almost 10% spike or something like that. But aside from that, look, the use of therapy has gone up. That's fine. What I find really interesting, though, is that Gen Z in particular has very much said, 63% of them say that getting therapy information and mental health information on social media is one of the most important ways to get information about mental health, which is a little scary to me, because as much as I'm like, that's great that you're looking out for that information on there, but also a little scary because, again, that person isn't your doctor. That person isn't somebody that's talking specifically to your situation. It's a little, like I said, kind of like when you have like a headache and all of a sudden you go on WebMD and you're like, why have I had a headache for 3 days? Oh my God, I have a brain tumor. It's like, it can be a really scary.
Just like I said, the smell of maple.
Exactly.
And I'm thinking, and I looked it up thinking it's spiritual, and it said, oh, you could be having a stroke. And then I realized it was the plants. But that makes the point in what you're saying about going online for mental health issues. It's like the wellness industry, because there's so much information. There's take this for that and this and this, and don't do calcium, you have to develop a way to navigate it. And same for therapy, where you have to be able to go, well, I don't know if this is the best advice. And so you have to be that person that can really vet things out.
Yeah. And just knowing who the audience is on social media, they're very young, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's sometimes hard to make clear judgment calls like that, especially because we have confirmation bias. And when you're going through something, I mean, look, when I was a teenager and I was in my 20s, everything was a crisis. Everything was very emotional.
Which
okay?
is, yeah, that's pretty
But,
true.
Like, it's pretty true
That's
of like
been true for
everyone.
generations, I would say.
It's like everything was a crisis. So it's really easy when you're in that high emotional state to sort of spiral. And now imagine if you have social media, which will show you an algorithm to give you all of the information to spiral with. And that scares me a little bit, because there's so much like good that can come out of that, of showing people that there's an opportunity or something, a lens that maybe they didn't think about. There's also so much that's bad, but I guess that's social media in general, right? It's like the good and the bad can both be weighed here. But anyway, one of the things that I did want to look into when I was looking at this episode was whether or not this was translating in Gen Z being more emotionally intelligent. And this is, first of all, let me read you the definition of emotional intelligence. This is from Harvard Business School, because emotional intelligence is actually seen as like a leadership term. It's seen as something that's like not necessarily a psychiatric quality, but something that's more of like a skill set in life, like an IQ. In fact, they call it EQ. And so emotional intelligence is the ability to understand and manage your emotions, as well as recognize and influence the emotions of those around you. The term was first coined in 1990 by researchers John Mayer and Peter Salovey, but was later popularized by psychologist Daniel Goleman. So there's 4 factors that have to happen in order to qualify for emotional intelligence. And if you don't have one or these or some of them, then it's not technically considered emotional intelligence. So you have 4 competencies when you're emotionally intelligent. The first is self-awareness. The second is self-management. The third is social awareness, and the fourth is relationship management. So that essentially means that you have to understand your own feelings, be able to control how you react to those feelings, understand other people's feelings, and then be able to manage the relationship based off of all of the 3 things that I just listed. I don't know that some of what we're seeing on the internet, especially with Gen Z, can qualify as emotional intelligence when you break it down like that. I think it's very much more about being more comfortable with just showing whatever they're feeling, whether it's messy or not. And that is different than I think probably everybody in this room grew up with, right?
Well, and I also think what you're describing with the crash out thing, that's definitely not emotional intelligence. I'm not saying that, I'm really not saying how terrible they are to do that. I think it's pretty intriguing. But it's totally separate, because I think, and like you described in the definition, it's about being able to control your emotions and know, you just be in charge, sort of being in charge of your emotions, and know when it's right to just, and when you need to rein it in.
Yeah. Maybe it's a bit of a pendulum, because I think if I look back at myself in my 20s, I still am loud and outspoken, I'm not going to lie. But imagine me in my 20s. It was even louder and even crazier. And I think the pendulum swung to a point where like I kind of had to just say everything and say, screw you, this is who I am. And then I kind of realized that doesn't always get me where I need to get. And so I brought it in a little bit and was a little bit more controlled with how I decided to express myself, still being true to myself. But there are a few times where you just got to bite your tongue, and you can't just always be,
And I think that does come with age, for sure.
It does.
Because I know I was much more emotional in my 20s. Doesn't mean that I don't feel things really deeply. I do, but I realize, okay, well, and also I don't party as much.
Yeah, well,
I'm
that
sure
helps.
that played
The
a
lack
part.
of drugs and alcohol definitely helps manage your emotions. That's for
But
sure.
it was fun.
Yes, I believe that. Yeah, I think the thing that scares me the most about Gen Z is that they're the internet. That's what it is. It's the fact that they are now putting all of these emotional decisions on the internet for everybody to see, and that that stuff follows you. But I don't know, maybe I have like a very old school way of thinking about it. We probably all do in comparison to them. It's not as big of a deal to them as it is probably to you or I, who were basically taught you're not going to get a job when,
Right there. I mean, there is that. I mean, it's all part of the social media thing.
Yeah.
Once they realize, you better not, tell all because people are reading everything.
Yeah. One of the other things that I've noticed when I've been like seeing a lot of this content online is actually that people are being really specific in their dating profiles about like attachment style. And also women are like putting requirements in saying basically don't apply if you haven't gone to therapy. Like don't even bother swiping on me if you haven't been in therapy.
But how are they going to prove it?
I don't know. I don't know if like your therapist sends you like with a letter to like your Bumble date, like therapist approved.
I mean, it's really not such a bad thing.
I mean, it's not a bad thing. But again, I stand by the whole thing that not everybody needs to go to therapy. I think everybody can benefit, but I don't think everybody necessarily needs it. That's my like 2 cents. But I'm curious, Greg, what do you think about this sort of rise in EQ or emotional speak across like the internet and just like this generation?
Man, well, double-edged sword, really.
Yeah.
Because you're right. It's good that people can talk about their feelings in a way that, you know, no other generation has. But at the same time, I mean, the crash outs, it's just a public temper tantrum. Like, it's literally just a toddler going, like getting their feelings out. And then people comment and like, oh, and then they get, you know, they get some sort of reaction from it, which is what they wanted. And, you know, whether that's healthy or not, I mean, who am I to say? But, you know, for me personally, yeah, that's definitely not how I grew up. And like, as a man, it's gotten better as far as being able to speak about your emotions. But I still just think we, as men, we just don't really like to as
open
much.
up.
Like, it's just not that interesting to us. And so it's like, yeah, like, oh, I wish you would speak your more, or like, because people often talk about, you know, oh, they feel bad, like men can't really speak their emotions the same way. And I think that's true, but we also don't really want to.
Yeah.
And that's the difference.
That's that is so enlightening. Because it's one of these things in life where me growing up, it was just, oh yeah, guys don't talk about their emotions. But I never thought about the possibility that maybe they just don't like to. I know now, I'm more kind of like a guy in that way, where I don't really want to. Maybe I've emoted enough. I don't know. But that's really interesting.
Well, also like, because the harsh reality is like, you know, women will say, oh, I want a guy who is in tune with his feelings. It can do. But if you are the guy who's acting like that, like no woman, like biology is what it is. They are not attracted to that shit. Like
I'm not really attracted to that,
to a point. It's obviously like, you know, there's a death in the family or something. Like, it's so, yeah, you should be able to cry. You should be able to like lean. But if you're just like, every time shit hits the fan, if you're crumpling into a ball, like, you know, most women want the guy who's going to be like unflappable in that situation, who is like, okay, like rise above your emotions because I'm not feeling them in the same way that like, you know, my female partner is, and like rise to the occasion, you know, and I think that's how we're built.
And you can be sensitive without being highly emotional. And you know what? All my friends, when we were growing up, we were, you know, but we're not. And maybe because life has beaten us up and some serious major stuff happens, because that's life. I mean, you know, losing people and what things you go through. So you kind of learn how to just not express every single emotion. It's just, I feel better. It helps me to stay more centered. I think it's absolutely important to be emotional, but I think you should just pick and choose.
Well, there's a balance, but I certainly think that this rise in therapy speak and therapy culture is also, on the other hand, creating a counterculture. Because have you heard of red pill culture?
Okay, yeah, kind of.
Okay, so red pill culture, Greg is probably pretty familiar with red pill culture.
Yeah,
it's very it's very big in the male space. It very much was popularized by somebody named Andrew Tate, which you may have heard that name. But red pill culture is sort of this idea that like you control your feelings and feelings make you weak, whereas therapy culture is more like feel your feelings, like express yourself, process your pain, all that sort of stuff. And red pill culture is very much rooted in this idea almost like a misogynistic, like manly men, and you have to be an alpha man. And if you are leaning into anything that is on the emotional side, and I'm probably oversimplifying it, but like more towards this like EQ heavy like language or idea, then you are not being alpha, and that is weak. And it is, I would argue, probably in direct response to the rising trend of women wanting to have a partner who is more emotionally intelligent and wanting to like kind of break the norms of what men often are like, of not really wanting to talk about their emotions and kind of demanding that in a way. And then on the other hand of that, you have this red pill culture that has popped up that is like, absolutely not. That's not what a real man does. And I think that's really, it's telling of kind of where we are as a society about how men and women are just not really speaking on the same level a lot of times right now. I think even if you just look at the dating world right now, about how single women view dating, especially in cities, it's like really depressing. And it's a little scary, honestly, that we're so far apart the aisle on this, you know?
Yeah, I think the thing with the red pill culture is, what's scary about it is that a lot of the advice that they're giving actually works. Like, it's like what they're saying like will work and help. Like you can get a girl from following these certain things, and they just take it to a very toxic place that's very dark. It's very
much like self-help wrapped in a misogynist undertone.
Greg, what is like an extreme, like a gone too far example?
Well, it's basically being like, you need to dominate these women. You need to always be, and then they're not like in it for a relationship. It's very much like, on to the next one kind of mentality. So it's not like, oh, they're trying to help you find the love of your life here. I think you got to find a balance because you can't be a guy who crumples in a ball on the floor, but you can't also just be the guy who's like, I can never show any sign of any weakness. Like that's insane. And you will explode one day. And that's like,
I don't think any woman
fathers grew up like where they was just, that's when the belt comes out, right?
That's right, Greg. We had that.
But on the other hand, it's like I've tried therapy. I didn't find it particularly helpful, or, to me, it felt like ruminating on my problems week after week was just keeping me stuck in a place that I didn't want to be. And so it's like, if you really have something specific you're trying to work through, I think it can be great. Talk with someone, talk it out. But this like perpetual, I just go to therapy every week forever. And I'm just like, I'm now having to think of things like, okay, well, what are we going to talk about today? I guess this bad thing. Like now I'm like actively looking for the negative in my life. And I'm like, this is messed up.
It's like growing up when I was a Catholic as a kid, we went to confession. You have to come up.
Yeah. You have to come up with something.
Okay, I got to come up with what I did.
Yeah. I know.
But I think therapy can have, I get what you're saying. I kind of agree with you, is that focus and that every week. I mean, obviously when there's specific things that are really important, it's really important for people, like for what you went through.
Yeah.
And me, I'm probably a little bit uncomfortable with it at the same time. Like, how much do I want to really get into the nitty gritty? I have to admit. So I just meditate and maybe go to a psychic from time to time, or do my Lotus tarot online.
I do find that a lot of times when people either they've only been to therapy like once a long time ago, or they are just like not in like are very hesitant about therapy in general. I think the big mistake that people make when they first start therapy is thinking, like expecting the therapist to already know everything about you and immediately understand you right out the gate. What people forget is that you have to put a lot of time into therapy before it pays off. So there's a lot of awkward sessions. There's a lot of times where you're there twice a week at the beginning and you have nothing to talk about and you're like, this is pointless and a waste of money. But what happens is that if you go through that and you've now established this person, that then something does come up in your life. Because you're right, week by week, maybe something doesn't come up that's traumatic, but maybe 6 weeks into therapy, somebody says something to you that really makes you angry for some reason, and your therapist is like, what's happening here? And then you dive into that. It's like catching it by happenstance and not forcing it. Now, sometimes there are big things, like when you're a kid and your parents are getting divorced, or like when I had my eating disorder, or you're going through a divorce or a relationship breakup, and then you have immediate things that you need to talk about there. But if you're just going to therapy because you're thinking maybe I should talk to someone, it's going to take time and it's not going to be perfect. And you have to put in the work and you have to be patient, because the whole point is that the therapist kind of catches you in the act of something and starts to learn your behavior patterns. And it's going to take time to do that. And it feels pointless and it feels frustrating, but maybe that's probably the reason you should be there. Because if it feels frustrating to dedicate 6 weeks to just talking to someone, then there's a reason you probably need to be in therapy, you know? But anyway, that's my 2 cents on that one. I think like everyone can benefit. Not everyone needs to go. I do think like there's something to be said about just in general having someone to talk to. And that's, again, like to get back to what's going on the internets with Gen Z right now. If nothing else, other people are talking to them on the internet when they are kind of publicly putting this out there.
And maybe that's a form of therapy in
Maybe,
itself.
exactly.
I mean, it's probably too early to know the impact of this and the crash out thing. My guess is that's going to change, the crash out. People are going to get tired of it.
It's the trend this week, but it'll probably change.
Yeah.
But there is a lot. What I do see a lot of is when people find out, like, and this is wild to me, but I also understand the anger. When people find out that like their significant other is like cheating on them, and then they like post it. And then like they always leave it on a cliffhanger, and people are like, algorithm bring me back to like when she addresses it with him. And then it's like, before you know it, these people have like one viral video, and then they have like 8 videos all about them finding out that their husband cheated on them, or their boyfriend cheated on them, or whatever. And like, it's publicly airing the dirty laundry, which I mean, look, I also like reality television, so I guess I'm not really shocked that I fall for this, but it is wild to me how many people do it.
Yeah. It is.
And I do wonder, like, after they do something like that, do they regret that? Or is it, you know, something that they're just like, okay, whatever. I guess it probably depends on the person. But I don't know that I would, like, publicly air me finding out that my significant other cheated on me on the internet like that. But that's just my own personal choice. But anyway, okay, I'm curious, Greg, what do you think for men? What do you think is like the hardest thing about like this shift in culture? Just like as you, and not even necessarily as like dating, but just like kind of the expectation of men with this shift in culture of people talking about their feelings more. What's the hardest thing to navigate?
I feel like the hardest thing has just been feeling like it's not okay to be a man in the traditional sense, or like, you know, we're supposed to change, like the idea of what a man is has changed, and like masculinity is toxic, and the things that you hear where you're just like, well, this is just how I was born. Like I can't help how I feel and like what my biology is. And so like I'm supposed to actively rally against and control myself from being any of these traits, but like it's okay for women to be totally feminine and embrace that, and
yeah,
it's
telling you you're wrong,
it's beautiful, but being like, no, your thing is bad. That's tough. And I feel like the pendulum's swinging back in the other direction. I think we've sort of felt like, because, you know, yeah, it's been tough. Like you look at the statistics, like men are having a pretty tough time. I mean, they're getting beat by women in almost every category, like academically and coming out into job markets and stuff. And so, yeah, I feel for the younger guys for sure. It's got to be really tough to be like, especially as like a teen or something, where you just have like these hormones raging and people are telling you it's not, your thing is not okay. But like, oh, the women, like, that's beautiful and embrace it. But like, but if you're a guy, you better get that shit under control.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I, it's interesting because on one hand, you know, as someone who thinks like what we stereotypically think a woman thinks like, right? I do want to, like, when I interact with men, I do want them to be like, why don't you think like I think? Like, why don't you understand this? And I want them to like learn a little bit more so it's not so frustrating. But at the same time, I agree that to be told that the way that you think that you were brought up to think, or that is just sometimes naturally ingrained in you because of whatever chemicals are going through your body, is wrong, and you should be ashamed of that, that sucks. That's not fair either. You know, there's got to be a middle ground somewhere. And I don't necessarily have the answer, but I do think half of it sort of lies in the fact of like, you can only be responsible for communicating your own feelings. And then if somebody is not listening to those or not respecting them, then you can put up boundaries. But like telling someone else how they should feel or how they should act or how they should whatever is like probably like none of our places to be.
I agree.
Okay, well, that's all I have.
You shared your feels.
I shared my feels.
And we listened.
Any other parting thoughts?
I'm all feelsed out.
This is like a therapy session.
To be honest, in a way, I have to tell you some.
Yeah.
And obviously, this is not therapy, you guys. I'm not saying this is therapy. But for me, there is a therapeutic aspect of it that it makes me explore things.
Yeah.
In the sense, I'm not getting advice until we get comments. But you know what I mean? It makes you, anything that really makes you stop and reflect on yourself, on your behavior, on your beliefs, all of those things, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Having self-reflection is really important.
And we're all a work in progress.
Exactly. And at the very least, you don't have to go to therapy, but to have the ability to self-reflect, I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah.
And to take a step back and, catch your feelings, see where they stand, and then make an educated choice after that. Give yourself
I'm gonna go watch those crash out things. Now I want to watch some of those.
They're very entertaining. It's better than Real Housewives.
I mean, I'm not making fun because some of that's real and people feel what they feel, and it's also in a way can be freeing, I suppose. So
It's true. All right, and with that, thanks for coming along today. If you want more, you can check us out on TikTok and Instagram at Along Podcast, and give us a follow on whatever platform you're listening or watching today. Thank you. Bye.
bye.